does the 2025 World Quizzing Championships tell us that can help us in the WQC 2026? In our preview videos, we analysed 5 years of questions in order to identify what you should focus your preparation on. Now I know where I was right and where I was wrong and what surprises the IQA had up their sleeves. So I'm going to share that with you, and let's look at the most common topics, genre distributions, the geographic distribution of questions, and the degree to which the question writers were inspired by recent events. And at the end of that, hopefully you'll be in a position to form a plan to do better next year. You may have seen the video where I looked at the last 5 years of questions and identified the topics that came up the most and then said how many questions I would expect on each of them. Now obviously there would always be some wiggle room in that, particularly with the topics that don't have clear boundaries. But there were 3 big surprises in how the questions fell this year. The biggest shock in terms of there being fewer questions than expected was in history. There were 5 fewer than expected. Now that's slightly offset by there being 1 more question in famous people in history, and we discussed in that video that there is an artificial distinction between them. We saw less military history than in previous years, and if we look at the genre distribution we can see that the main beneficiary was current affairs, which went up from 4 questions on average to 7. And if we look at that genre as being 4 history topics plus current affairs, then this feels like a significant rebalancing, with the 4 historical topics now totaling 23 questions and current affairs having 7. And I'd not be surprised if this is broadly the new benchmark for the genre, which means that with 1/4 of a genre up for grabs, there is real value in keeping up with current affairs. Just a note on the genre distributions, you may have realised these weren't in the videos that we put out before the WQC. They were discussed at the All Things Quiz study group, where we went into a lot more depth and tried to understand not just which topics come up in each genre, but what tended to come up within those topics. So if you want to join our Patreon and look at those recordings, go to patreon.com/allthingsquiz. And you not only support the running of All Things Quiz, you get access to exclusive content like the study group and some quizzes. Anyway, back to the shocks. The next 2 shocks are linked. In the entertainment genre, this was the predicted distribution based on the previous 5 years of quizzes. In 2025, we saw the music in the WQC shaken up a lot. Pop music went up by 50% to 15 questions. Classical music doubled to 6 questions, while jazz and world music fell from 4 questions to 1. Overall, music went from 60% of the genre to 73%. The second big shock in entertainment was that the increase in music content was at the expense of broadcast media. Television lost over 50% of its questions. Now I'm less surprised about radio not featuring so much, as it really doesn't lend itself so well to WQC questions in the same way as other media channels. But television has always had a significant presence in the WQC, and 2025 was a big skewing of the genre away from TV towards music. Do I expect this to be the future distribution for the genre? I don't. For one thing, there were 2 questions that I think better fit in other topics but reference TV shows, and in general questions that cross topics force you into artificial categorization, so you could argue that there was more TV than these stats show. There were 6 questions that did that in this genre. There's 1 question specifically about a film composer, but there's also another question about a krautrock band also known for movie music. Do you categorise the latter one as a pop question or a movie music question? I kind of take it as how they're described at the outset. So they were described in terms of krautrock, and then movie music was given as a clue. But you could easily say it was more a movie music question than a pop music question. However you cut it, I think with 15 questions, pop is overrepresented in the WQC in 2025. TV, on the other hand, was underrepresented. And I think classical music is now about right, having previously been underrepresented. So my guess, give or take, and there is always wiggle room and variation year on year, is that pop will drop down a bit. Jazz and world will gain a question back. Classical music will probably settle around 5, so some years might get 6, 7, some years might get 4. And TV will rise to about 6. So I think there will be a rebalancing, and I don't think this year will prove to be typical. Personally, I think there is a strong argument for putting pop and TV at the same kind of level of distribution, so maybe 8 or 9 questions each. I'd love to see that. I think it's unlikely that we'll see it though. Aside from the big shocks, food and drink jumped into the top 10 topics, and current affairs sneaks in with a share of equal ninth. But broadly, the most common topics over the past 5 years remained the most common topics in the WQC in 2025. Now onto genre distributions, and here is the full set of the 8 genres with my predicted distributions for 2025 and the actual distributions as they were in 2025. Now, lifestyle is a particularly interesting one. It's so hard to predict, and all you can go on is what's come up before. In 2025, fashion went up from 2 questions to 6, and food and drink, as mentioned, went up to 8, whereas products and brands dropped from 5 to 1, and health and fitness went from 5 to 2. But the most interesting thing for me was that there were 4 questions that just didn't fit any of the designated lifestyle topics. But they clearly fitted in with lifestyle nonetheless, and simply wouldn't have fitted in anywhere else. So perhaps it's time for the already long list of lifestyle topics to get even longer. It's a really hard genre to pin down, but if nothing else, don't assume that if something doesn't fit into one of the IQA listed topics, that it can't come up. It can, and quite possibly will. In terms of geographic distribution, typically about 80% of questions in the WQC can be linked to a particular continent, and in a lot of cases to a particular country. In 2025, there were 52 countries implicated in questions, whereas in 2024 there were 62. In terms of continents, the questions were consistent with the previous 5 years. Europe was still the most represented with 31.6% of questions, down from a 5-year average of 32.41. North America was second on 18.75, Asia third with 14.16, and then Africa with 4.75, South and Central America on 3.33%, and Oceania on 2.5%. Also broadly consistent with historic data were the countries that were implicated in the most questions. In 2025, 41 questions out of the 240 related in some way to the USA, and that's slightly down on the 5-year average, but it's still 17% of all questions. France remains second on the list with 12 questions, joined by Italy that bucked the 5-year average and rose to 12 questions. UK was next with 10 questions, and after the UK, no other country reached double figures. Japan saw the biggest drop in questions, falling to 3, and South Korea jumped into the top 10 with 5 questions. But overall, there was no radical change to where the questions in the WQC relate to. They still reward good knowledge of the Anglosphere and of European content. Finally, onto the things from the last 18 months leading up to the WQC that I said in a video were worth looking at. And I think it's fair to say there were hits and misses. But by my reckoning, there were 28 questions, so almost an entire genre's worth, that were either about or plausibly inspired by things that happened in 2024 or the first half of 2025. So it would be foolish to not try to cover that sort of period before a WQC in your quiz prep. And I totally take on board what the 2025 World Quiz Champion Dow Jackson said in my interview with him, that there are some topical things that are just simply not worth learning because they have little value in the long term, probably not even the medium term. And for me, I don't learn about UK cabinet ministers beyond the great offices of state because they change too often to be of value, and once they do, that knowledge is useless, it's lost. So what was worth learning ahead of the 2025 WQC? I said that you should keep your eyes on obituaries because they could inspire question writers. And at least 5 answers were available to you in the WQC from this route. Suleiman Cissé, the Malian film director. Oliviero Toscani, the Italian photographer. John Marsden, Australian author. Mark James, the American songwriter of songs like Suspicious Minds. And Zakir Hussain, an Indian tabla virtuoso. All of these came up, all were gettable if you'd been following your obituaries. I said that you should keep an eye on changes of government, wars and revolutions, and there were points available from these. So you had Milanovic elected in Croatia in 2025, the South Korean president being ousted in December 2024. You had a lot of French prime ministers in 2024. You had Nicaragua making a vice president a co-president in January 2025. So keeping on top of politics and elections and those sorts of things from around the world gets you points. Contemporary art in the news would have got you 3 questions. There are at least 4 questions that reference streaming services such as Netflix. In music, there's so much happening in the pop world all the time. You obviously need to keep an eye on the big global hits and hit makers. And we advised you to look at the Spotify Billions Club, and lo and behold, a member of the Billions Club came up. Also, as predicted, K-pop featured for the first time, and I don't think it will be the last time. It's here to stay. There were 3 questions on multinational companies that were in the news in that 18-month period, and 3 that dived into current social media personalities and themes. Finally, there was, of course, the 2024 Olympics content, and it would be naive to ever exclude major international sporting events of the previous 18 months, particularly multi-sport events like the Olympics. As for the things I got wrong, well, the main area where I was way off the mark was award winners. There was simply no Grammy, Emmy, Tony, Oscar, Cannes or Nobel winners or whatever from the past 18 months. But all these are still worth learning in the long run because they will get you points. There were award winners from all of those categories from outside of the 18-month date range. Maybe for the WQC, the current winners are considered as too much low-hanging fruit, but a couple of years down the line they are tougher. I don't know. There are usually some of the more recent award winners, so maybe this year was a blip. So it's not wasted work, and it may not pay you dividends in the WQC, but it may well, of course, reward you in other quizzes. I also predicted that members of the Trump cabinet would come up, but maybe it's just too soon for that. Maybe there haven't been enough scandals or news stories or controversies yet, but I'm confident they will come up at some point. And that's the thing with all of this. While you can identify the topics that will come up in the WQC and even accurately predict a few questions, the reality is that improving at the WQC is a long-term project. It requires you to work smart and to work hard. And you need to not expect instant gratification. You're in this for the long haul. You will get points in the next WQC off the back of your work if you do the right work. But not always in the direct way of learning a fact and then that fact coming up. Sometimes it will be because your learning gave you some more context that helps you make a guess or exclude answers. You'll also get points in other quizzes thanks to your work. The WQC is not the only quiz in town. I firmly believe that quizzing is part the skill of learning the right things, part the skill of remembering things under pressure, and in no small part, the skill of identifying and understanding the contextual connections between things. Because it's that latter skill that enables you to make educated guesses. And the WQC, probably more than any other quiz, tests that skill because the questions you know the answer to immediately will be a smaller proportion than pretty much any other quiz you do. But the other thing I would say is that you need to try to enjoy the process of preparing for the WQC and not just focus on the score you achieve. With everything that's ever happened up for grabs, you can't cover everything, so there's always a chance that you and the setters are just going to be on a different page, irrespective of how much good work you put in. So enjoy the process of learning and see that as a goal in itself and feel happy with what you've done in that regard. You're planting seeds for the future, so accept you don't know when those seeds are going to bear fruit. And if you want to know what you should be learning, well, I hope this video and our other WQC prep videos have given you some ideas. There'll be some links to those videos on screen right now, and thanks to our patrons once again for their support. We've had an influx of new members recently, and if you'd like to join them and take part in things like our quizzes and our study groups, go to patreon.com/allthingsquiz. But if you'd like to support the costs of running All Things Quiz without becoming a member of our Patreon, then you can click the 3 dots below this video on YouTube and make a one-off gift, or you can buy us a coffee, the link for which is in the description below. And if you aren't in a position to support us financially, then that's absolutely fine. Simply clicking like on our videos and being subscribed helps other people like you to find our content, and that's brilliant if you do that. Until next time, happy quizzing!